Sony got 10 things wrong with the FX5 and nobody is talking about them, but I think that you should be aware of them before you buy one. And we're gonna start with what is, in my opinion, the biggest annoyance, but it's also not something that you'll ever be aware of until you actually use the camera for a while. And that is that selecting your video format and resolution that you're filming in is, let's say, confusing at times. Let me explain. With other Sony cameras that pull more of their DNA from the alpha line, like the FX3, FX2, FX30 that I have here, etc., if you want to adjust your video format, all you have to do is go into the menu, to shooting, image quality / recording, choose your file format, and then choose your recording frame rate and resolution, and you're good to go. But with the FX5, this setting is actually quicker to change, but it's also less intuitive at the same time. So you hit the menu button, which will bring up the project panel. So you can change settings like your resolution and frame rate and codec, all right here on one page, which is great. And let's say you want to film in 3x2 OpenGate. So you go over here to Imager mode and select full frame 5K 3x2, select execute, and the camera will then change to that setting. But if you say, actually, I want to film in this at 120 frames per second, which it gives you the option to do, let's select that, press execute, and the camera is then going to reboot, and whenever it comes back on, it's suddenly no longer filming in RAW. You're going to discover that it is actually filming in XAVC SL 422, which is arguably the worst format to choose when filming. And so if you aren't paying attention, you may think that your camera is recording in RAW, but because it can't do that at 120 frames per second, it silently switched to the worst video format. Even worse, and here's something that really threw me off whenever I was initially learning the camera, is that even when you are filming in what the Imager mode says is full frame 5K 16:9, if you are filming in XAVC S, HS, or I, you're gonna see that even though it says full frame 5K 16:9, below that for video format, it says 3840 by 2160p 4K. So the camera is reporting to you two different things with very confusing labeling, and you have to be very careful because you're like, yeah, I'm shooting 5K. Nope, you're shooting 4K. Thankfully, this could be fixed with a relatively easy firmware update. All they'd have to do is switch the Imager mode to say full frame 4K whenever you're actually filming in 4K, which I think that would actually help a lot of people and make the camera more intuitive and easy to use. Another issue to know about that is related to all of these filming modes is my second issue with this camera, and that is just the amount of times that it needs to reboot between changing video formats and resolutions. In short, if you switch from filming in RAW to a non-RAW format, so let's go over here and select codec, and let's say we want to film in x-ocn 2 because we want to record in RAW. Press execute, the camera is immediately going to reboot, and notice how long this is taking. It takes about 10 seconds, which whenever I say 10 seconds, it doesn't seem that long, but whenever you're trying to film something quick like a wedding ceremony, 10 seconds can feel like an eternity. You're like, turn back on camera, hurry it up, we're missing moments here. In addition, the camera won't just restart whenever you're switching video formats from RAW to non-RAW, for example. It will also restart whenever you are switching from 24 frames per second to other higher frame rates. So right now, we are at 60 frames per second. But oh, you know what? Actually, I want to shoot this part at 24. Cool, execute, gonna reboot again. Takes another 10 seconds. The camera just loves to restart. And the FX3, on the other hand, wasn't nearly as restart happy as this one is. I don't know if there's something Sony can necessarily fix with a firmware update for this. There's probably a reason that the camera needs to fully restart. But at the same time, if you are someone who films things very quickly and you're oftentimes switching between settings, you're going to notice how much slower it is to film with the FX5, and you're not gonna love it. Next, and sticking with this talk about resolution and frame rates of the camera for a minute, we are on issue number 3, and that is that while the FX5 can film in OpenGate, which is just fantastic news. I love it so much. Me and other filmmakers have been asking for this for so incredibly long, and I'm so glad to see Sony finally included it. At the same time, Sony still feels quite far behind Panasonic when it comes to the amount of OpenGate features this camera supports. With Panasonic's closest competitor to the FX5, the S1 II, you can film in 3x2 or also 4x3, and you don't have to do it in RAW. You can choose many different formats. You have so many options for OpenGate with that camera. With the FX5, it feels like Sony took a page from Canon with the C50, where they're like, you can film in OpenGate, but only in RAW and only in 3x2. Please take this and be happy with it. Thankfully, Sony has told me they're working on a firmware to add the ability for you to record OpenGate 3x2 in XAVC-SI as well, which is better than nothing, but I would love to see XAVC-HSL with its much smaller file sizes also get the ability to record in OpenGate. This could be fixed with future firmware updates, but Sony needs to work on it. Now, let's move on to some physical things that are wrong with the camera. These are issues that can definitely not be fixed in a firmware update, and that I doubt we're gonna see any remedy for until we see an FX5 Mark II sometime, hopefully sooner than 2035. First, we have arguably the biggest issue when it comes to how the FX5 was built. And while I'm happy that it works with a robust XLR audio handle just like the FX3, and I'm even more thrilled that Sony chose to listen to filmmakers and go with a detachable EVF that is completely optional. What I don't love is how the EVF and XLR handle attach to the same place on the camera, making it so you have to choose if you want an EVF or if you want a handle. You can't have both. Do you want a viewfinder or do you want 32-bit photo audio? You have to choose. Now, when Sony first told me about this feature, I was so excited to hear that they were partnering with my friends at Condor Blue to make an EVF cable that will connect to this proprietary port at the top of the FX5 and then enable you to mount the EVF to a different part of the camera body, giving you a lot more flexibility when it comes to building out something like a shoulder rig. In a perfect world, this EVF port would be in a different place on the FX5, which would enable you to at the very least run a cable so you could use both the EVF and the XLR handle, but that is sadly not possible either. I'm like, could you scoot this over a little bit and scoot the hot shoe over the other way maybe, and then we could have both kind of nestled up on there? I don't know. I'm just trying to think of ideas here. Otherwise, the only other workaround that I could see Sony possibly making work with a future revision of the FX5 would be to somehow enable one of the dual USB Type-C ports on the camera to work with an EVF cable adapter, which could enable you to have the XLR handle and the EVF, or maybe they could make an XLR handle with a cutout down here at the bottom, which would then enable you to insert a right angle cable into the port for the EVF. But I've harped on this enough. I feel like Sony ran out of space on the camera and they had to use the proprietary EVF connection port, and this was the only place they could put it, so it makes sense. Next, talking usability now. The biggest physical usability issue that I've discovered when using the FX5 is that I found myself missing the rear control wheel that has been on the back of all of Sony's previous alpha cameras. This is really a tough issue for Sony to fix though, considering they wanted to make the screen larger, which a lot of people are very happy about, but that took away the space for the control wheel on the side. But at the same time, I would have even taken a control joystick right up here on the back of the FX5, just like you get on the top. In short, it's kind of difficult to access this upper joystick. You kind of have to hold the camera like this and use your thumb, and it doesn't feel as easy to use the FX5 as it did with previous Sony cameras where you have your thumb resting on this control dial and you can rotate it so quickly and press all the buttons that you need. Filmmakers will probably get used to it and it'll be a pretty easy workaround, but you need to prepare yourself for a bit of a learning curve with the FX5. Now, keeping on this usability trend, there is one feature that is actually missing from the FX5 that was included on the FX3, and this may actually upset a lot of filmmakers because I know that it surprised me when I discovered it. The issue is the FX5 cannot take photos at all. Not JPEGs, not RAW. It has a button that looks like a photo button on the FX3, but this button doesn't actually work for photography. It's just another button that you can customize on the camera, and Sony calls it the grab button. You know, grab a photo? Nope, can't do that. Sorry, grab a video? It sounds weird, right? It sounds a little bit weird. Oh well, grab button. The FX3, FX2, FX30, they are all video cameras with a photo capability, but the FX5 is purely a video camera like a Venice or Burano. It's not going to take photos, which is a bummer, and it does make this camera less versatile than other Sony cameras. Sony has told me they're working on a firmware update to add the ability to capture stills from videos in camera, but I doubt they're going to be raw stills, so you're out of luck if you want to take photos with the FX5. Now, switching back to the software of the camera for a second, another feature that Sony added that I'm thankful for, but also feels kind of like the bare minimum, is the addition of waveforms and vector scopes that are built into the camera. This is something that filmmakers have asked for many, many years, and credit where credit is due. Sony also implemented false color, and it works amazingly with this camera. It's a fantastic implementation. I have to say though, the size of the vector scope and the waveform monitor leave a lot to be desired. They are very small, and I would love if we could adjust not only the size, but their position on the screen, like you can with the waveform monitor on the Panasonic S1 II, for example. I'm dragging this thing around, it ain't going nowhere. So there could be a setting that I've missed that lets you adjust the size and position, but by default, these scopes are in the bottom right of the camera, and they're not moving, and they're really tiny, and it makes them a bit harder to use. Thank you for including them, Sony, but please make them easier to use in a firmware update. Next, for features that can be fixed with a firmware update, and I'll preface this by saying this is a bit more of a personal preference, but I think that a lot of filmmakers coming from the FX3 will agree with me on this. I don't necessarily love the color scheme that Sony is going with when it comes to menus on the FX5. I know this is very similar to Sony's Venice and Burano cameras, where they all have much more muted color palette. It's more professional. It's just gray and yellow. That's what you get. Hope you like gray and yellow, because those are your only options. But I have to say, I'm someone who kind of likes the varieties of colors that you get on the FX3 menu. It makes it a bit easier to navigate things. Whenever you're talking to people, you don't have to say, you know, go to the shooting menu. You say, go to the red menu. That's the shooting menu. And like, oh yeah, the red menu. I know where that is. It's just a bit easier to use. And I'm definitely not saying that the alpha camera menu is perfect either. It needs plenty of work still, but you can let me know in the comments if you agree with me or not on this. Do you like the rainbow colors? Do you want the black and yellow? Let me know. Next, let's look at the side of the FX5 for the next issue, and I may get some flack for this, but Sony opted to include an Ethernet port on this camera underneath the HDMI port. And Sony told me this was for remote filmmakers that want to have a lot of cameras set up in a rig to be able to control all of them, but personally, this feels like kind of an edge use case to me, and if they had room, I would have much preferred to see an SDI port here, which is considered to be a much more professional level video transmission port than HDMI, and I think a lot of filmmakers would have appreciated that over Ethernet. Of course, if you disagree, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to be wrong about this. Maybe it's interchangeable, and you can use both. I don't know. Now, as for another feature that Sony does not include with this camera, this is one that I knew I'd have to mention because people will be upset with me if I don't, and that is that so many filmmakers over the years, so many, have now begged Sony, pleaded with him to include an ND filter of some sort with their smaller cinema cameras. And if any company could do it, it would be Sony. But think about how mind-blowing it would be too to have a camera roughly the size of the FX3 that also had NDs. Oh my gosh. Oh, incredible. Sadly, I've talked to Sony about this, and Nikon and Panasonic, all these companies, talked to all of them, and they all tell me there is simply not enough space in a camera this size to put an ND filter in. So I get it. The engineers are saying no, but at the same time, what if they said yes? We can dream, right? What if they broke the laws of physics and made it happen? I guess we have to wait for an FX6 Mark II that would have the FX5 sensor. That'd be cool, right? And it had NDs. Let me know if you want something like that. That'd be awesome. Give us the IBIS from the Burano 2. Wow. FX6 Mark II would be a beast of a camera. Anyways, this all brings us to talking about something that I'm actually not sure if Sony got wrong, but I want to hear from you about, and that is the price of the FX5. At $5,000, this is definitely not a cheap camera. And taken in a vacuum against the FX3, which Sony is currently selling brand new for $4,300, heck, you can spend $700 more and get a camera that's improved in almost every single way over the FX3 while being almost the same size. Awesome. But it's only awesome if you are ignoring the competition. Nikon has the ZR, which also records RAW with a very large screen and a compact body with great autofocus, and it costs less than half the price of the FX5 at $2,200. Canon has the C50 and the R6V, which are both quite competitive with the FX5 and cost thousands of dollars less. I've talked about Panasonic with the S1 II that beats the FX5 when it comes to OpenGate features and is also much cheaper. So, what do you think? Is the FX5 worth it? Personally, I am going to be buying one, but I also bought an FS5 when that camera came out over a decade ago for $5,000 too. I remember a time when you had to spend $20,000 to buy a RED camera if you wanted to record in RAW. We've come a long ways, and cameras have gotten significantly better, but also cheaper. But it also feels like prices, especially for electronics, are going up. So let me know what you think, and I will link to a playlist of all my other FX5 videos down in the video description, as well as a link to my edit videos like a pro guide. This guy's gonna show you my biggest rules that I follow as a video editor. I know it's going to be helpful to you as you edit your videos too. It's linked for free down in the video description. Please subscribe if you want to see more videos about filmmaking and the FX5, because I have a lot more videos about this camera, a lot more coming, a lot more I've already made. Yeah, check them out. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.